Hello students, chapter 14, we're going to start with lesson 14.1. So lymph is the clear watery fluid that surrounds body cells and flows in a system of the vessels throughout the body. The lymph fluid originates in blood. It's rich in lymphocytes and monocytes. It flows in the lymph capillaries and vessels, also flows through the lymph nodes and lymphatic organs, which are the liver, spleen, thymus, and nodes, and it helps absorb lipids in the intestines. The functions of the lymphatic system: transport proteins and fluid that have leaked back into the bloodstream. So these have leaked out of the bloodstream and it brings them back. Lymphatic vessels absorb lipids from the intestines and then transport them to the bloodstream. And lymphocytes and monocytes protect the body by attacking foreign cells and organisms on the cellular level. So the structures of interstitial fluid and lymph capillaries are blood and lymph capillaries, lymph vessel, interstitial fluid, and tissue cells. So here's an illustration. Blood from the arteries, the tissue cells. Interstitial fluid is the light green, dark green is the lymph capillaries, and here's the blood capillaries intertwined, and then the blood makes its way to the veins and then the heart. And the fluid, the lymph fluid, flows to the upper chest. So again, lymph originates from the blood and filters out of teeny blood capillaries into the spaces in between the cells. The fluid that surrounds the cells of the body is called interstitial fluid, and this passes continuously back and forth into the lymph capillaries that have very thin walls, and then those weave through the tissue spaces. The lymph passes through the larger lymphatic vessels through clusters of lymph tissue, and then finally it reaches the large lymphatic vessels in the upper chest. The lymph enters these large lymphatic vessels, and then those empty it into the bloodstream. So here's a larger illustration. Oxygen-rich blood coming out of the heart to the arteries, arterioles, down into the small blood capillaries, intertwined through the tissue cells with the lymph capillaries. Deoxygenated blood then goes into the venules and veins, right side of the heart. And the lymph vessels continue through the lymph node and then back into the veins. For the anatomy, we have the lymph capillaries and vessels, and then the lymph nodes, which are located in the cervical region, which is the neck, axillary, which is the armpit, mediastinal, which is the middle of the chest, mesenteric, which is in the intestinal, para-aortic, which is in the lumbar region, and then inguinal, which is in the groin. So inside the lymph nodes, you have macrophages, and these help to eat up or phagocytose foreign substances. You have B cells, which are lymphocytes. These produce antibodies, and they mature first in the bone marrow. And then you have T cells, which are also lymphocytes that attack bacteria and other foreign cells, and those originate in the thymus gland. The spleen, which is located inside the ribs, behind the diaphragm and the stomach. The purpose of the spleen is to destroy old red blood cells, and it filters the microorganisms and other foreign material out of the blood. It activates the lymphocytes during blood filtration, so the B cells then become activated B lymphocytes so that they can produce antibodies, and then the activated T cells attack the foreign materials. And the spleen also stores blood, especially red blood cells, which are erythrocytes, and platelets. The thymus gland, which is right there in the center of the chest, right above the mediastinum, right below the thyroid. This provides immunity beginning as early as while you're in the fetus and then into early years of growth. It makes the cells immunocompetent in early life. And early removal from it impairs, so if you remove it from an animal or a human, it impairs its ability to make antibodies and then produce cells to fight antigens. So it's not a good thing to remove. Additional parts of the immune system are the leukocytes, or white blood cells. There's neutrophils, monocytes, and macrophages. The lymphoid organs, which are lymph nodes, the spleen, thymus gland, tonsils, and adenoids. These all produce lymphocytes and antibodies. And immunity is the body's ability to resist foreign organisms and toxins that damage tissues and organs. You can have natural immunity or adaptive immunity. So natural immunity is when your resistance is present at birth. So it does not depend on prior exposure to an antigen. So natural immunity would be provided by phagocytosis, macrophages, and then other natural killer cells inside the body. Adaptive immunity is when the body has the ability to recognize and remember specific antigens in a specific immune response. So the T and B cells, lymphocytes, provide this. Antibodies that are produced after exposure to an antigen. There's memory, which is secondary exposure, vaccination, immunoglobulins, and also maternal antibodies can be passed from mother to baby. The B cells are responsible for humoral immunity. These originate in the bone marrow from stem cells. They produce antibodies after exposure to specific antigens such as viruses and bacteria. A B cell matures into a plasma cell that produces antibodies called immunoglobulins to block the future effects of that specific antigen. The T cells are responsible for cell-mediated immunity, so this does not involve antibodies like the B cells. Cytotoxic T cells attach to and directly kill the antibodies. Other T cells secrete cytokines, which are interferons and interleukins that help cells respond to antigens. Helper T cells promote antibody synthesis by B cells and stimulate other T cells. And then suppressor T cells, which are regulatory or also called Tregs, these inhibit B and T cells and prevent them from attacking the body's own good cells. So those are important. And then dendritic cells are a macrophage derived from monocytes. They recognize and digest foreign antigens, and then they present antigens on the surface to stimulate B and T cells. They can transfer immunity by exposing the dendritic cells in a culture and then transfuse them and get them to stimulate the T and B cells. Some examples of immunotherapy are monoclonal antibodies, or MOAB. This is when multiple copies of cells or genes that kill tumor cells are made. This is passive immunotherapy. Vaccines, which contain antigens from the patient's tumor cells, then they stimulate the patient's own T cells to recognize and kill the cancerous cells. This is active immunotherapy. And then you can transfer immune cells in bone marrow transplants. The T lymphocytes from a donor can replace a patient's immune system with new cells that recognize the tumor cells as foreign and then kill them. So we'll review the vocabulary. Adaptive immunity is the ability to recognize and remember specific antigens and then mount an attack on them. Adenoids are the mass of lymphatic tissue in the nasopharynx. An antibody is a protein produced by B cells to destroy antigens. The antigen is the substance that the body recognizes as foreign that evokes an immune response. Axillary nodes are the lymph nodes in the armpit. A B cell is a lymphocyte that matures into a plasma cell to secrete antibodies. Cell-mediated immunity. These are the T cells that respond to antigens and destroy them. Cervical nodes. These are lymph nodes in the neck region. A complement system. These are proteins in the blood that help antibodies and kill their target. Cytokines are proteins secreted by cytotoxic T cells to aid in antigen destruction. Cytotoxic T cell is the lymphocyte that directly kills antigens. A dendritic cell is an antigen-presenting cell. This shows T and B cells what to attack. Helper T cells are the lymphocytes that aid B cells and stimulate T cells. Humoral immunity. These are when the B cells produce antibodies after exposure to specific antigens. This is a type of adaptive immunity. Immunity is the body's ability to resist foreign organisms and toxins that damage tissues and organs. Immunoglobulins are antibodies secreted by plasma cells in response to the presence of an antigen. Immunotherapy is the use of immune cells, antibodies, or vaccines to treat or prevent disease. Inguinal nodes are the lymph nodes in the groin region. Interferons are proteins secreted by T cells and other cells to aid and regulate the immune response. Interleukins are proteins that stimulate the growth of B and T lymphocytes. Interstitial fluid is the fluid in the spaces between cells, and it becomes lymph in lymph capillaries. Lymph is the thin, watery fluid within the lymphatic vessels, and it's collected from tissues throughout the body. Lymph capillaries are the teeniest vessels of the lymphatic system. Lymphoid organs are the lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus gland. The lymph node is a collection of stationary, solid lymphatic tissue along the vessels, the lymph vessels. And the lymph vessel is the carrier of the lymph through the body. A macrophage is a large phagocyte found in lymph nodes and other tissues of the body. Mediastinal nodes are the lymph nodes in the area between the lungs in the thoracic cavity. Mesenteric nodes are the lymph nodes in the mesentery. Monoclonal antibody is an antibody produced in a laboratory to attack antigens and to destroy cells. Natural immunity is the protection that an individual is born with to fight infection. Para-aortic nodes are the lymph nodes near the aorta in the lumbar area of the body. Lymphocyte that secretes antibodies, that's the plasma cell. It matures from B lymphocytes. The right lymphatic duct is the vessel in the chest that drains lymph from the upper right part of the body and empties into a large neck vein. Spleen is the organ in the left upper quadrant of the abdomen that destroys worn-out red blood cells. It activates lymphocytes and it stores blood. Suppressor T cells or Treg cells are lymphocytes that inhibit the activity of B and T cells. The T cell is the lymphocyte that acts directly on antigens to destroy them or produce chemicals toxic to antigens. Tolerance is the ability of the T cell to recognize and accept the body's own antigens as self or friendly. Thoracic duct, this drains lymph from the lower and left side of the body and empties into large veins in the neck. The thymus gland is a lymphoid organ in the mediastinum that conditions T cells to react to foreign cells. Tonsils are masses of lymphatic tissue in back of the oropharynx. Toxin is a poison or a protein that's produced by certain bacteria, animals, or plants. Vaccination is the exposure of an individual to an antigen that provokes an immune response that will destroy any cell with the antigen and will protect against infection. A vaccine is a weakened or killed microorganism, toxin, or other protein that's given to induce immunity to infection or disease. So, quick quiz. Which lymphocyte originates in the bone marrow and transforms into a plasma cell to secrete antibodies? Does anybody remember? It is B, the helper T cell. The formation of antibodies in lymphocytes after exposure to an antigen is B, humoral immunity. Okay, and here we have our combining forms, prefixes, and terminology. Immuno, lympho, lymphatino, spleno, thymo, toxo, ana, inter. And that's the end of lesson 14.1.